Hi, this is Kelly Sadler, the commentary editor at the Washington Times, and this is Politically Unstable. Today, I am joined by Diana Lufti. She is the founder of the Healing Science Policy Institute. She also wrote a column for us titled The Science Wars. There's been a lot of debate on Capitol Hill this week, and there'll be much debate moving forward as RFK Jr. looks to roll out his MAHA strategy. He was under attack by Senate Democrats, basically calling his approach to science unscientific. And they're upset with what they perceive as chaos at the CDC, with the CDC director being fired a few weeks ago, and then mass resignations as RFK Jr. looks to hire the people that support his agenda and roll it out. So, Diana, could you just talk to me about kind of your column, what prompted you to write it, and explain, science versus science here?
Sure. What prompted the column actually was what prompted this original movement to begin with, which was that science is at war, and it's actually always been at war. There's mainline consensus on certain types of topics, and you can practically question all sorts of things except for very specific issues that automatically get labeled as pseudoscience or anti-science. And that pertains directly and very specifically to vaccines. But almost everything that is the scientific application that goes into healthcare and medicine, that also gets labeled as pseudoscience and anti-science. And so the two differences when people say science is a tool. And scientists actually debate all the time. The problem is whether or not a particular view or a particular interpretation of science is essentially pushed. There is no such thing as science being apolitical. It is political, but it's political in a different way.
Explain that. What do you mean political in a different way? Because, I think that before COVID, there was consensus, or people didn't know what the CDC did. They didn't really, they weren't following what the FDA was approving or not approving. They just went along to get along, but at the same time, we were seeing that our children were getting more obese and coming down with illnesses like ADHD, and their health was generally declining. We've seen younger women get breast cancer at numbers and rates that we've never seen previously. And we all, I think, were collectively questioning why this is, or what are we doing in terms of as a society, that why are we all getting sicker, right? But we accepted, I believe, the mainstream version of what the CDC, the HHS, it was all working for us. Then COVID happened. And with COVID, everything that came out of those government bodies were lies. And RFK Jr. Put it very eloquently this week. Like, we were told the vaccine was going to protect us from contracting or spreading the disease. That was false. They said that these cloth masks would protect us. That was false. They said that we had to be 6 feet away from interacting with human beings. And that was based on absolutely no data whatsoever coming out of these bodies. So kind of describe to me how you got on board the MAHA movement, and kind of, there's alternative natural healing methods that are actually put below, I feel, as a society, where they value the vaccines and whatnot, and kind of put down these other methods because they don't make the pharmaceutical industry any money.
Yes, and also because I think on the issue of scientists coming together, anytime someone actually comes up with a discovery, anything new in the field, whether that's here's what's actually causing inflammation, here's what's causing chronic illnesses, here's what's essentially killing the human body, they get shut down. So they've actually been there And there's some credible, amazing scientists at both the NIH as well as throughout like our academic medical institutions. As soon as they start saying that perhaps what we're doing is wrong, they get shut down. They get silenced. One has dealt with a case where her attorneys actually discovered that the other side had paid a Harvard medical expert $60 million to testify against her.
What case is this?
This is one of my scientists. Her name is Maheen Khatami. She's retired. She should actually get a Nobel Prize for her discovery on inflammation as one of the disease mechanisms. She was there at the hearing. No one really knew about her. And on top of that, she was essentially silenced by the NIH to not talk about what she is doing, right? That's the science war. That's why science is political. That's why we don't have the answers that we should have. At the end of the day, there are these physicians, there are these scientists that exist. They all came together within my organization to kind of talk about how they have been silenced. As soon as a physician actually discovered the mechanisms that helped during COVID, she has a gag order in Puerto Rico. And then all of these other physicians and scientists that don't are scared at this moment. They're terrified of their colleagues. We are trying to essentially help them get a little bit more comfortable with waging that war on truth, because they all know that at its core, science is a tool. They all know that when they look at some of those other studies, that their colleagues might actually be fabricating either the data or that data does not match its conclusions. And so a lot of what is going on right now in society and right now all over the news is very directly connected to the science wars, which is which ideas get platformed in science, why they get platformed is something that RFK is essentially kind of trying to introduce and trying to discuss, but also fundamentally the controversial issues that were not allowed to be mainstreamed and discussed within that world. Another way of looking at it is a lot of these scientists are part of TED's brain trust. So when they kind of came together and they mainstreamed against RFK, there were other groups of people that actually dissented. They were not able to dissent. They were not platform. They were not online. They were not given any sort of stages, mostly because essentially as soon as they presented on their ideas, they get discredited by their colleagues. They get essentially restricted on their license. I used to be a TED licensee. I was actually that movement's poster child. I started a whole youth movement in Southern California. I couldn't platform credible physicians and credible scientists to literally just discuss their findings and their science, because TED had a brain trust that said that these individuals were fringe and or they were not credible. And so their research was essentially stripped. They could have hundreds, and some of them actually had hundreds of peer-reviewed publications. That's the science wars. That's why Americans are not getting answers that they need in terms of their health, because these individuals are essentially being discredited by their colleagues. They're getting pushed in the sidelines, and getting them to the right place almost requires me to basically pull through time and space to get them in front of the right people.
Because all of the research that's going on right now needs to be funded somehow. And in order to get funding, you need to be able to present it and get investors to invest in it to grow it. But if you can't get beyond that initial phase, then essentially your research doesn't go anywhere. And who decides to fund what ventures is very political, as we've learned. But Diana, could you tell me a little, and our viewers, a little bit about your history, how you came to the MAHA movement? You weren't a conservative warrior your entire life. Is that correct?
That is correct. I was actually probably the liberal poster child, if you will. I grew up in various schools in Southern California. I went to Berkeley, spent 2 years, actually graduated early. But I was involved in a part of the MAHA movement since undergrad. My research was on coercion in pediatric healthcare. So that was actually independently funded by Berkeley. I looked across various states. It had IRB approval. And I basically looked at what was going on within our healthcare system that no one really wanted to discuss. And I placed that in academic language. And that's all that is. What happened was, as soon as I was invited to essentially present on that work, I couldn't use the language coercion. They basically said if I use the language of what was actually happening, I would never, ever get an academic position in that space. So I left.
So what was the language? What was the topic? What were you looking at? What discussions were you trying to have that you eventually were shut down? Like, but what language was used, and what was the discussion that you were trying to have that you were prevented from having?
I was trying to just introduce the fact that parents could not refuse medical procedures, period. They were coming in, and in some states, they were not allowed to leave the room. They were being called upon by Child Protective Services if they said they disagreed with the risk. And a good example of that came in line with the history of bioethics abuses. So there's a 17-year-old case. 17-year-old had Hodgkin's lymphoma. This was reported on the news. She had court-ordered chemo despite her and her parents' wishes. And then she died essentially a year to 2 years after that. She was forced to die. She was not even given the ability to say no.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you were looking at all of these very kind of controversial cases where basically the government or the courts stepped in and demanded patients have what they, at best intentions, I'm sure, what they thought was going to be life-saving, but turned out to be life-ending. So yes, these are difficult conversations. So you were writing about that and exposing that and questioning that, and then you were shut down.
Yes. And then after that, I basically ended up getting really, really good at policy issues. And I got pulled by 3 friends to do the detransitioners amicus. That was after law school. And I wrote it, and I basically just used all of my past research and background, recognizing that no one was actually going to be a researcher in this area and advocate for all of them to come together. That was actually cited in the Spermetti decision.
And so what does your institute do, and how do you said you've working with a lot of other doctors, researchers who have been silenced and or pursuing studies that kind of conflict with, the culture narrative. When you're saying detransitioning, no one's really looked into that because we were just told that young kids should be pumped up with hormones, have sex changes, and that'll solve their problems. And then it's like, but does it really solve their problems? Actually, we see the suicide rates are the highest amongst the people who have transitioned. But you're tackling tough questions. You're trying to find the answers to tough questions where there is no research, where the research just doesn't exist. So you took on other clients or other these cases?
I took on, so I ended up basically putting myself at the center of a lot of difficult, controversial medical issues, at the center of two various movements, and now trying to essentially help support all of the physicians and scientists that do support Kennedy, or at least that believe in me, which apparently are a number of them. They're all over the place. They recognize that science is a tool. They recognize that there is scientific politics, and they also recognize that people, their colleagues in particular, that have the answers, that can actually justify a lot of the statements that Kennedy is making and trying to introduce, are like, they're being silenced. They're out there. So when we talk about the research not necessarily being out there, it's not that it's not out there. It is out there. It's actually trying to get that in with the administration to the right people. They've almost been screaming in the ether. I think for some of them, they've had studies that went from like 1990s. They were just not platform. A lot of DC, I think you recognize this, a lot of DC and a lot of difficult political conversations happens when people are shown certain subsets of data, whereas other data sets are completely repressed. People are not even given that option to see both, to see everything, and to have that sort of tested. And I really do think that in our group, we have perhaps the most integrous individuals alive, because they actually do look at each study. They look at the research. They've done that work. It's exhausting. And figuring out how to just coordinate that is part of what I'm doing right now. A lot of that is actually helping them coordinate, helping them figure out how to speak and pitch that to different types of senior officials, as well as building their courage and strength, for them to kind of recognize that they, number one, they're not the only one, which is why I think what makes our institute extraordinarily unique. Often in the MAHA movement, the physicians and scientists that support Kennedy have been individual. Right. So they know him from their past history. They have shown him studies, but those studies have either been discredited or, worse, hidden. I've ended up striking a giant gold mine of all of the individuals that are trying to change that scientific narrative, that have those studies and research, that have pioneered something absolutely new. They're just not known. And that's the distinction. It's crazy. We had a launch event on May 9th in front of the White House. And all of these individuals actually ended up coming to the front of the White House in Lafayette Park to talk about their discovery, to talk about the topics that have been repressed in the medical research that could actually help save a lot of Americans. They're just not known.
Yeah, I mean, and that is the problem. And I didn't focus on this problem. I wasn't unaware of it, but COVID really made me become aware of it, right? Because we were blanketly told what to do and mandated to do it, with our jobs on the line in some cases, if we didn't, and all of the alternative voices were suppressed and censored and monitored, right? On our pages, we featured Dr. Malone, who was one of the first people to question. He developed the first mRNA vaccine and that technology, but was the first to question its effectiveness as a therapeutic. The discussions of ivermectin, even Ron Johnson yesterday, Senator Johnson was talking about that at RFK's hearing. And YouTube has since then edited his comments on ivermectin, has blocked them out because he was saying how that could be used as an alternative, preventative or, therapeutic for COVID-19. I was encouraged to see one of RFK's first moves was to bring Dr. Bhattacharya into the administration. He was blackballed from the scientific community for questioning what was being implemented during COVID-19. And I think that, RFK Jr. is a disruptor. Whether or not he's going to be successful is we have to wait to see. But he definitely is a disruptor and forcing us to have these conversations that we might not otherwise would have had.
Absolutely. And I think perhaps the larger conversations that has to happen in the scientific medical community. Because those conversations are not happening. They're happening in silos. They're happening in secret. They are not able to actually come together colleague to colleague and disagree, or they're scared to. And for the first time, perhaps in history, and this is why RFK is historic, a lot of them actually feel some sense of confidence. The distinction and perhaps the issue right now is it will go back into scientific truth. And that is where the war lies, because corporatization of medicine is a topic that nearly everyone in healthcare can agree is a problem. The censoring and lack of access to life-saving treatment is also another problem. The problem is whether or not the treatment that is essentially considered life-saving is actually life-saving. That's the war. Because if those treatments are not life-saving, if those treatments actually cause harm, if, for example, vaccines in and of itself, all of the VAERS data, all of the VAERS study, everything from Hep B onward, the Hep B vaccine was put on the CDC schedule because they could not get the intended population to take it. Mm-hmm. That is absolutely scary. No matter who you are, understanding that fact would not only make you question the entire agency, but the incentive of whether or not they're meant to keep people healthy and whether or not those risks and benefits and trade-offs are transparent of a process. Physicians don't have that. They're told to do it by healthcare agencies. They have to essentially trust in order to do their job. And when these organizations are not placing a different form of ethics, when it's a greater good mentality where regardless of the risk factor, regardless of the individual, you're told that this is safe and effective because the community considers it safe and effective because the government considers it safe and effective, and it's not actually safe and effective, then we have a problem. Mm-hmm. That's the war. Right?
That is, and it's not gonna fix itself overnight. I think the discussion is the first step, and acknowledging the problem is always the first step to solving the problem. I think we're just right there at acknowledging the problem, and there was still a lot of senators on Capitol Hill this week that didn't even want to acknowledge the wrongs that were made during COVID and since, and how politicized the CDC had become. One of the White House coordinators for monkeypox, for example, during the 2023 outbreak, basically said he downplayed his the effect on the gay community, and it's a man-to-man sexually transmitted virus. And that's where the outbreak was. And they were the highest risk population. But instead of just saying that simple truth, they kind of obfuscated, is monkeypox the new COVID type of thing. I had mothers being like, how do I protect my children from monkeypox? It's like, your child will never get monkeypox, right? But it was the scientific community that wasn't clear on exactly what it was, who the high risk individuals were, and what they had to do to prevent themselves. Instead, they didn't want to stigmatize the gay community, so they put fear in all of the rest of us that weren't clear on that. Diana, where there's a lot of confusion right now as to who to trust, where to go, what really is based on science, what's being driven by, corporate interests versus like for moms that are just trying to do their best out there. Can we trust RFK Jr.'s what's coming out of the CDC today? Because I don't think we can. There's still so many career bureaucrats in the agency that are still in control. You can't fire everyone. You can't clean house overnight. But like, who should we put our trust in?
I think this is going to sound like a cliche question, but God. Because at the end of the day, everyone's going to have a very different version of reality and interpretation of that data. And no one's going to have the answer to everything. Science itself is a tool. It's not truth. And that's what makes a lot of people scared. People fear what they don't know. But the issue with everything in science, in medicine, is that there are lots and lots of things that we don't know, that your doctor doesn't know, that your doctor is scared to tell you that they don't know. But it's okay to not know. It's okay to not have all those answers. And it's okay to take a step back and actually start questioning data and science and research. That's the proper role of scientists. And that's how science and innovation advances to begin with. It starts by actually a hunch, a question, look at, is this the right thing? And I think that's what's really needed during this time. It's being comfortable with that unknown and having more honest conversations about what is known and why we know what we know. I think a lot of Americans trust their provider and their physician to tell them the answer because they probably had really great experiences with them. And that's amazing. And then all of the data that kind of comes out that could demonstrate otherwise, it almost takes a level of courage and humility to say, okay, like we were wrong about this, but let's actually move on to find what is right. Good leadership right now is needed.
All right, Diana Lufti, thank you so much for joining me today and talking about your experiences, your work, the doctors that you're supporting, and basically where we're at right now at this pivotal time, kind of questioning the research, questioning the science, trying, all of us with having the best intentions, wanting to live long and healthy lives, and make America healthy again. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.